Welcome to the Husker247 Podcast. I'm Brian Christopherson. I'm joined by Michael Bruntz. Michael, how you doing, man?
Not bad. We're in it. This is week
We're in
3
it.
of fall camp. This is
Are we swimming in it?
not swimming. We're just in it. This is where you got to dig deep and push through. We've moved out of the dorms. We're back. The UTEP, the minors are getting closer in the distance, and so it's time to buckle down and really answer some questions today, I think.
Game prep starts usually 10 days from the opener. Tony White says you don't want the game plan to get stale to the boys. To get me through it, I was just going to bring up this as a quick side topic. I think one time when we were on a road trip, you kind of had a few jabs at me because I bought some Werther's Originals. And
I had more than a few, I think. More than a few jabs.
it's sort of thought of, I guess, as an old person's candy in some circles. I don't know if you've been looking around at the grocery store. Werther's Originals like a great example of someone adjusting themselves on the fly and modernizing. And they've got these chewy candies of all different flavors, which are just like crack. I mean, they're just I don't know if I should have said that, but I've never had crack, but they're good. So just to defend myself from like a year or two ago, because this lives in my head sometimes when you were taking that shot, I was like, I stand with Werther's. And so I just want to get that off my chest.
They're kind of the REO Speedwagon of the candy aisle. Like they've got some staying power. They're always around. Whatever. I don't know what the candy version of playing like state fairs is, but they do that. I mean, yeah, it's an old people. There's no, that's their market. Like I understand they're probably trying to, get young again, but maybe it's the taste of a new generation. Who knows?
Yeah. Well, anyway, if you're in that 18 to 34 demographic, they should talk about. I just would tell you try the chewy ones, whatever flavors they have them in all kinds. Really good.
There's probably some hipsters in Brooklyn right now that are just cramming Werther's Originals.
I don't know who is my fellow company and loving it, but I'm glad to have them on my team.
Old retired people. That's your company.
That's our banter segment of the day. Werther's Originals are their stock is rising. So we're not going to do the stock up, stock down thing. We're going to do the similar, though, I guess. Is it a thing or is it not a thing?
Yeah.
I think this. And we can throw some topics that have kind of floated into the air this fall camp at each other and see what each thinks. We haven't discussed this prior, so I'm intrigued.
Yeah.
Let's start with the obvious one. I think it is left tackle in the last week suddenly became a thing or not a thing, I guess. That's the question. But definitely a topic that's in the air after the Teddy Prohaska injury, which first off, I would say everybody who covers it and is a fan, it was tough because Teddy, he has worked really hard to get back. And so you just feel whenever an individual has something like that taken away from them after all of that. But the football goes on, and Turner Corcoran certainly is an experienced guy who's Matt Rule's always said prior to last season, he's the only guy we knew at left tackle, because Teddy was recovering last year. And then there's some young guys behind him. So I don't know. After all the stuff kind of cleared and you thought about it, is this a big thing or not a thing as far as Nebraska's season and like the impact here it can have?
Yeah. It's a thing. It's definitely a thing. Am I wrong that it was a thing before Teddy got hurt? Like it was a thing that we perhaps were not talking enough about?
No,
Like
you're not wrong.
I think going back to that Saturday Big Red preview or whatever, Turner Corcoran got the first team snaps at left tackle, and Teddy was with the second team.
Right.
Like I don't think it would have been a stretch at the time to like if they had released a depth chart that night. Like I feel like there probably would have been a big giant or between the two of them. Like I think that's kind of where it was at. So
and we love a good or.
we like an or. Yeah, so it's a thing, though. I mean, you have Turner Corcoran, who anecdotally at times has struggled at left tackle. I know Pro Football Focus takes kind of a dim view on his ability at times for whatever you value those ratings. He's also, kind of in that same boat as Teddy to a lesser degree, never really kind of been healthy. I mean, he has, but he hasn't. And the reason it's a thing, I think, is behind him, you have Gunnar Gatula, a redshirt freshman who was listed as the number 2 left tackle last year for most of the season, but didn't get into a game on offense that I can recall. I think most of his time was on special teams and the block units. And Grant Segrin, who is a redshirt freshman who's gained like 50 pounds, and has not played in a game as kind of your third guy there. So it's thin. I think it was going to be a little bit thin anyways, but it's definitely a thing, especially when you kind of talk about having to protect the blind side of a freshman quarterback. Like that's a tall task. So I mean, it's kind of put up or shut up time, I think, for Corcoran in some ways, because whatever battle was going on there was suddenly clarified in a major way, and we'll see how it goes. So I'd say thing.
Yeah, I like how you laid it out, though. Probably a thing before even the Teddy injury. It was the side. It was the position on the O-line that you probably thought most had to prove itself. Maybe there's clarity now. Turner there, Micah Mazuka, Ben Scott, Justin Evans, Ben Hart. Does that sound right to you right now? I mean, Latovsky obviously could be in that mix at the guard situation, but is coming back from a calf injury. So you would think it would be hard for him to just jump right back to the top like opening week if it buds up against that.
Yeah. No, I mean, I think you kind of know what your group is. I mean, aside from that left tackle spot, it felt like everything else was pretty solidified. I mean, Lutovsky, like you said, maybe he gets back in there quickly, but I think the longer that goes on and he's standing on the sidelines, you're almost kind of better off for continuity's sake, just having him be like the swing guy at guard in some ways. So I mean, I don't think there's a ton of question probably about who's going to be running out there against UTEP. Is there? I mean, like, is there somebody that could come screaming up the depth chart that we're forgetting about?
No, I think we're naming the 5. And for those who are wondering, I mean, Rule did, when he was talking about Gunnar Gatula and Grant Segrin, it was either Saturday or just before it, he was saying guys to follow up Teddy, basically, was the quote. So, I mean, or Turner, I'm sorry. So, if there was any, like, sort of debate about, like, could one of those guys beat out Corcoran? I guess anything can happen, but at that point, it didn't seem like that was the case if Corcoran's healthy.
Mm-hmm. Okay. So that was one probably at the one position battle at the start of fall camp that you had circled on your scorecard. The other one was cornerback. I mean, I think that's the spot opposite of Tommy Hill. Tony White talked on Tuesday and rattled off a long list of names. Is it a thing or not a thing that we're sitting here on August 14th with Big Ten Network in town, by the way, today? And we don't have more clarity there. What's your sense of that spot? And is it a thing or not a thing?
It's a thing to me because they play Colorado week 2, and I respect whatever's gone on or is going on in Boulder. And it's hard. I mean, I'm kind of glad I'm not there.
Yeah.
Covering that, because you might find yourself in the middle of the story. But whatever's happening there, we do have to say, I mean, Shedeur Sanders is a talented guy who's a tough guy who bounced back from a bunch of sacks last year against Nebraska to throw for a healthy amount of yards by the end of the game. They've got good skilled guys who are going to test those corners. And so for that reason, I've always thought like that's going to be a little dicey, it's that first test for some young player is going to have to probably be out there on an island at some point in that kind of game on NBC, and they're going to have to make plays, and maybe they will. But it's one of those deals where if you didn't play like an offense or some skill guys like that till like week 4, I would say not as much a thing, because I do believe Rule and the staff actually feels pretty good about we're going to find somebody through these names we're mentioning. Jeremiah Charles, I know, is one. He got kind of dinged up a little bit, it sounded like Saturday with the knee. We'll have to see if that lingered at all. Dwight Boodle got a mention. Mari Sanders has been mentioned. But what they could do, Bruntz, is like the Saturday open practice. Tommy Hill didn't happen to be out there that day, but if he were, you'd have Tommy on one side. You have Gifford as your rover. You have Singleton, who's obviously having a good camp from what we heard, and Buford, who's having a good camp. Hartzog would be a safety. Maybe Buford. I don't know. He was at the one corner, wasn't he?
Yeah. No, he was playing the other corner spot. It does him moving out there, does that ease your concerns about week 2? I mean,
a little bit.
I agree with you that if like Nebraska was playing like, I don't know, Air Force or somebody that you know is just going to crank the ball at you, or at least not, chuck it 60 times, you'd feel a little bit better about that. But I mean, is Buford the best option out of that group just because he's kind of a known entity at this point?
Yeah, could be. I've always thought of him more as a safety just because that's what I've been used to. So I guess I have to get my mind around it, and I don't know exactly how to look. But Buford has always, and it sounds like his younger brother, Mario, by the way, is on that same track. He popped up as a mention as just their fast studies. I mean, that family is so put together, and those guys came in like ready to roll. And Marquise is like the type of brain like you love to have on your, on the back end of your defense somewhere. So yeah, it does ease my concerns somewhat. And then I sort of look at it as cornerback historically has been one of those positions where an 18 or 19-year-old could pop up and play okay and hold his own. We've seen that before in Husker history too. So it is one of those spots where instincts can take over and a guy can excel or hold his own. That's a very young player. And Rule has said, he mentioned Larry Tarver and Mari Sanders. He said, those guys, like you get them on 7-7, they can cover. They can cover now. I think you got to throw in like a Southern coach now at the end of that.
It's like it's punctuation.
They can cover now. So it's just like sort of the little things in them, I think, being dialed into every part of your defense and what you're wanting to run and understanding it that you have to figure out time. But the skill set's there. So I do think it is a thing. I'm not as I don't think it's as much of a thing as left tackle, actually. That would be if I ranked them at this point.
That's interesting. Okay, so I've got another one going back to the offensive side of the ball. We had said we were going to play catch. I guess I've thrown a couple times here, but
you're just throwing the ball to yourself.
Yeah, so I'm just whipping it off the wall here. Running back has been a big topic of conversation for basically, I mean, since last season. I mean, you had the 2 season-ending injuries. Nebraska went and got Dante Dowdell out of the portal. They returned Gabe Irvin, Johnson & Johnson, Quentin Ives. You've got Malachi Nelson as well.
Mackay,
sorry.
No, that's all right. There's 40 names.
My bad. We heard from EJ Barthel. Is it a thing? Like, is the concern a thing there? Like, it feels like we're trying to replace Giambi in the aggregate here. Like that's kind of what it feels like to me. But is it a thing, and what's your level of concern about the running back spot?
Okay. I'll go the other way on this one. I'll say not a thing. They have to prove it. Obviously, we know that. But I think with the cast of characters they have, if you go through the position groups, I don't like that would not be one that kept me up at night if I were a coach over there. I would feel like between the guys you have, if everybody's healthy, that's sort of a group that's probably deeper than Nebraska's had at that position most years, as far as like experience and guys who have at least shown, if they are available, that they can get some things done. And what's been interesting about the running backs, I think, is first off, Dante Dowdell's like in the mix. Like, he got mentioned as one of the four with the other three veterans, as at least in the conversation to figure out the 1, 2, 3 order sort of that. So that's good that Dowdell is at least that he's there. So you kind of know it's those four right now. And then it feels like it changes sort of by the week to me who has momentum. Like, you kind of feel it like on the fringe, like who maybe is gathering momentum. Like, I think Emmett Johnson, like, because he was the returner, like coming into camp, you felt that, and it still could be that way. But then there was sort of a Gabe Ervin push, after that Saturday scrimmage. He, I think, was getting his confidence and his sea legs back under him. And then Ramirez, and he is in the best shape he's ever been, and I think in a great headspace. And so Ramirez, whether they want to line him up traditionally or in other ways, is going to be a factor for this team. But do you have a guess on who do you think's going to emerge as, like, I'm not just saying like the first depth chart, but like 6 games into the season, who were like, okay, he's the first one and he's the second one. What do you think?
Assuming health, I think I would probably lean towards Ervin or Emmett Johnson.
Mm-hmm.
I think Ramir Johnson is going to have a lot to say in this offense, but I don't think it's going to be kind of traditionally like the other two. Like, I think they like what they saw early on from Gabe Ervin last year and kind of the trajectory he was on before the hip injury. And if you actually go back and look at like that Colorado game as an example, I mean, he had a really nice game if Nebraska could have just stopped turning the ball over. Like, I think he's kind of got the skill set that they really value in a running back. So as we sit here in August, I would say that, by the bye week, I would be not surprised, but I'd be surprised, actually, I guess. I would be surprised if it was not Emmett Johnson or Gabe Ervin if everybody's healthy.
Mm-hmm.
And I think there's a place at the table for Dante Dowdell. I think he's getting closer to that group, because I've always kind of aligned it in my head of like, this is the tier of running backs and this is the tier here. And I think that's kind of how they're viewing it as well, is like, this is the group that we're going to pick from early on. We'll see if we need the other guys over here. I think Quentin Ives probably has a role on special teams as a kick returner. I mean, I think 1 or 2 of those guys is probably going to fill that role, but I would lean Emmett Johnson or Ervin. I think that's where I would go. And I agree with you. I don't have as much of a concern about that group, because I think they're going to benefit quite a bit by not having to run against 8 and 9-man boxes every play.
Yeah, I've thought about that a lot in the last few months, and it was really when Rule, you could tell he's like, I mean, let's see what they do when you're not running against like 8, 9 guys. Like, I mean, it hasn't really been a fair evaluation of those backs in some respect. They've talked a lot, and this is where I could see Emmett Johnson maybe being a top guy, is because I can see his skill set in this, about making people miss at the second level. Having that guy who, okay, it's not just a 4-yard run, but he makes it a 12-yard run, or, as Rule said, an 80-yard run. And I could see Emmett having some of those juke abilities to be that guy. But that's going to be a real interesting thing. I like that you're talking up Ervin too, because I always have gone back to, when he's healthy, he's their kind of back. He's their 75 yards in the fourth quarter kind of back. If you think even in the Minnesota game last season, which was a grinder, remember he had that one run when they were backed up on their own 10-yard line, and it wasn't that well blocked, and he ended up busting through and made a move, nice move, and he got about 30, 35 yards. And he did some things like that the first 2 weeks before the injury. But I think not a thing, though, as far as I think they'll have a pretty good answer at that position. So that's where I sit on that. I've got one for you. This is more positive, too. Garrett McGuire said it seemed like genuine too, like really encouraged about where the offense is, and sort of I think you'll remember the quote I'm talking about, like how he feels like they're playing the guy's strengths, basically.
Yeah.
Are you buying that as a thing, that they have moved to that part where this offense is really going to take off a couple levels, because of that?
Yes, I'm buying it with a little hesitation though. I mean, I think I kind of need to see it first before I'm going to go completely all in on it. I think they have guys. I think they have more guys at the skill positions this year that have strengths that they can play to. Does that make sense? Like,
Mm-hmm.
I think they've elevated enough at certain spots to where they can do that. I mean, wide receiver for sure. Tight end, I think, it's largely the same cast of characters there, but at tight end, you've got Thomas Fidone, with a full off season again. I think there's a benefit there. And I don't know. I mean, even you go back to last year, I mean, there were guys running open, and they schemed up some good things last year, I think. And I think there was frustration on the part of the coaches sometimes where it was like, you just couldn't take advantage of it. And so I think they will be able to do that better. I just need to see it first. So is that a thing? Moderately? Like
Moderately a thing.
Yeah, I think they can do that. And I think that an improvement in the passing game at the quarterback spot would allow them to do that as well. So I will accept it. I also need to see it against UTEP first. Like, when Matt Rule says they're going to murder people if they get certain looks from defenses, I'm kind of like, okay, that hubris and that confidence is coming from somewhere. So I'm willing to accept it. We'll see if it plays out, though.
Speaking of, doesn't it seem like Jalen Lloyd surfaces a lot in, whether it's the practice videos or this is like, this is message board sleuthing to a T, but like all that stuff they put out, he's always sort of there. Like it just feels like he must be making his share of plays.
I will buy him as a potential breakout star, even though he kind of did last year. But I think so. I don't know if you noticed this, but even though we saw just a small fraction of practice last Friday, Jalen Lloyd didn't practice in the Saturday scrimmage or Saturday practice. He was there on Friday. Did you notice how often, and even in that very small window, that the ball was going to him? Like,
yes.
It was noticeable of like, okay, this you pair him with Banks, Nair. You've got Malachi Coleman running with the twos, which tells you how much depth they've got at wide receiver. But having Jalen Lloyd in there, it just adds a different dimension. So I don't know if you're asking if he's a thing or not. I will buy him.
No, he's a thing.
He's very much a thing.
Is Ja'Cory Barney a thing?
I think he can be a thing. I think,
and we mean this in a good way. Everybody.
Yeah. No, I mean, I think he's got the right mix of like confidence that you want in a freshman, and he I think has the ability to back it up as well. Like I think if he can kind of figure out the speed of the game piece, because I mean he's an elite athlete, he always has been. I think a lot of times what maybe holds freshmen back is trying to figure out that everybody else is athletic now, and how do you function within that space? And I think he can do that. Like he had this great catch it was like a shoestring catch that was like down around the grass and just like in a slant drill last Friday. That it was one of those where there were audible oohs.
I know the play. He caught it. Was a very tough catch. He caught it without
terrible pass.
Yeah, it was. I don't know who threw it, but he didn't let the ball touch the turf at all, and he just kept moving while collecting this really rough looking pass. It was really impressive. I think too, he could be a guy who's tough to resist, maybe at punt returner. IGC, we haven't really seen what Isaiah Garcia Castaneda can do, I think, as a return man, because it felt like last year at some, whenever the last couple of years it's been just secure the ball sort of. But Barney's been back there too. And I also wonder how much of a threat he could be in the run, as a receiver, as a run option,
Yeah.
like giving him the ball and just cracking some space open for him. Let's see what happens.
He's towards the top of the list of the play to their strengths list, right? Like when they talk about somebody like that, that's who they're referring to. I mean, they're referring to Jalen Lloyd. I mean, I think they can put him in better situations than they did last year. They're talking about Barney. I think, even a guy like Carter Nelson, if he's going to play a little bit, I mean, I think they're going to put him in very specific situations that, call for a 6'5", 230-pound wide receiver. So whenever Garrett McGuire said that, Barney was like the first person that popped into my mind of like, they're going to find a way to use that strength, because he played wide receiver, he played quarterback, did some running back, like he's done it all. So I do think he will find his way on the field, and I would not expect him to redshirt.
Yep. Him, now Carter Nelson, Shavers. Shavers might be special teams more at first, but you can tell they love him.
Yeah. Anybody else?
I'm probably missing somebody obvious right now. Feels like there's one other one.
Well, Dylan.
Yeah. I bet Dylan's going to get out there.
Yeah, he might get in there for a couple.
I think they're going to, my hot take is I think they're going to hold Dylan to 4 games. That's a joke. Yeah.
You can't say stuff like that.
No, you can't. Not anymore. I reiterated because I think I do this sometimes. I've always thought, like, for a while, it's like, yeah, he's the number one guy.
Right.
And sometimes I don't nail that home, and someone else will elsewhere and make a big thing and people kind of react to it. I was like, is that are we supposed to do that? Or I thought we're already working under that assumption that was the case, but
yeah, that's been settled. We are good on that. It does not need to be said anymore.
And that was a joke 25 to 30 seconds ago. What I said, it was just a bad joke. Do you have any more things?
Yeah, I do. Nebraska getting votes in the AP poll.
That's a good one.
Is that a thing?
And
it was 2 voters.
Yeah.
It was
they
2 voters.
16 points, but because 2 voters and one was it John Wilner?
Yeah, had him was he 14th?
Yeah, he's out on the West Coast. I think they're going to be a ranked type of team this year. 8-4 is my prediction. So that kind of falls in that 21 to 25 or 16 to 25 range, maybe. I don't know if they go 8-4. So I have no problem with it. I've always thought Nebraska, and some people would scoff at this because it's like, oh, they're always the off-season team. But I really think this year, they're the perfect example. If you were lived in Boise, Idaho, or someplace outside our bubble, and you wanted to look smart and take a flyer, even on and I'm understand this, a college football playoff team, if you're just I want to have someone who's sort of way off the radar, Nebraska would have those parts where you could make a case for that to then at the end of the year crow about, you know what I mean?
Like a decent floor with potential high upside.
Yeah. And Washington last year was, that kind of team and won a lot of close games and got there. So my prediction is not that that's going to happen, but I think they're the perfect team for okay, I want to look kind of smart in my top 25. If I were in Nebraska, I probably wouldn't vote them in because I'd be I don't need that blowback. I'm not a voter for the homerism. But if I were outside the state, I honestly would maybe throw them at 23 or something. You know what I mean?
Yeah, well, preseason polls are stupid. Let's get that out of the way first.
Okay. We texted about this. Do you think if they beat, Colorado, even though Colorado's not thought of like highly, but it's a high profile game that'll be one of the more watched games of the first month at least because of Dion and all that. Do you feel like Nebraska with a good performance there, if they're 2-0, is ranked?
It depends how it happens. Like, it always feels like 20 to 25 in week 1 and 2, or week 0 even, I guess, because that's a thing now. There's a lot of volatility there. And I mean, even saw last year, I mean, Colorado goes in and, just blows the doors off of TCU. And all of a sudden they're like the toast of the town. And they were ranked in that game, right? Didn't they got moved into
they were. They were. It was an opportunity for Nebraska to end that awful skid. That's like 22 games or something.
So I think if it's like a convincing like win, like I could see there being a lot of attention because it's going to be a primetime game.
Mm-hmm.
I think there's the narrative out there is that game is such like a inflection point for Nebraska of like, win this one, it's a huge win, and I think there's something to that to a degree, but I just think that I think they could sneak in at like 25 or 24 if it's a convincing win, just because, week to week early in the season, that poll flips so much. And I think a lot of people kind of fall victim to the moment.
If you win that game, you're playing your next two in Lincoln in prime time. And it just feels like it would be kind of you have to take care of business, and Illinois is not going to be someone you just walk over, but it feels like it would just be kind of a party around here. Like, I mean, it would get really fun and those night games would have a lot of energy. And it seems like, especially with a week 2 win, it would be very tough to beat Nebraska and Lincoln with like sort of the enthusiasm that would be wrapped around the team.
Yeah.
The reason why they might not be ranked after Colorado is because back to the fact that only 2 people voted for him, really. So if you actually had like 8 or 9 who voted for him, and they're suddenly moving Nebraska up to like 16 in all their polls, like after a couple weeks, or 18 or something, then you're in. So that's where it's not a big deal either way, but it was just a thought experiment.
Yeah. No, yeah, I mean, Nebraska's already, 14th in one poll. If they beat Colorado, they might be number 1.
You'll see them get a first place vote.
Get a first place vote right out of the gates. Yeah, that's what might be coming up.
Okay, my last one for you is,
we'll end on this one.
It's very general. Defense. Rule said they took a nice turn last Wednesday, sort of liked where things went. Then on Saturday, Tony White seemed happy with like how they're going to work, but didn't like tackling in their first scrimmage, which isn't a shocker because, you're kind of thudding up until then. And so you're a little loose with it. But do you do you think it's a thing? Like, it's sort of all off season. It's been easy to say, well, Nebraska's going to have like a top 10 defense. If the offense can just come up to here, things are great. Do you feel good about that thing now that it's real, that we're in crunch time, that it's 17 days from kickoff, that is like you're hearing the type of stuff that makes you believe that's going to be a top 10 defense?
I believe so. Yes. Like it's to me a defense that still very much has room before it hits its ceiling. Like I could even top 10 defense is tough because I think Nebraska, even if, like, let's say they're top 20, I think they would get a ton of mileage if they took the ball away more.
Yes.
Like, and sacrificed, total yardage or whatever. Like,
right.
That to me would be a big step forward, and I think they can be. I would have been more concerned if Tony White would have told me that tackling was good in that scrimmage.
Mm-hmm.
Like, because I know he has high expectations. You see him at practice and he's just on guys. Like he's cool, calm, and collected at the podium, but he like flips that switch and just goes to kind of another place. And I think he is making sure that, guys don't get comfortable with the way things went last year. That defensive front is legit. Like I would buy a ton of stock in that. Like I believe that. They got to get the secondary figured out. Linebacker, I think they've got enough guys to make that work. But I'm buying the defensive performance. I think they can. I think they can go to another place with that. And I'm not so focused on like, is this a top 10 defense? But yeah,
I think you nailed the answer. Like you could be 22nd in yards per play allowed, but let's say you have 22 takeaways compared with 14 or something like it. I mean, it all will even it out or actually probably put you in a better space than you were last season. So takeaways is the big one. I don't think I've ever, this isn't an overstatement. Tony White's the most impressive coach in a year at Nebraska I've seen covering it. Just how you were describing him as operating like on the field, and then you see the composure he has, like just answering questions and how affable he is there. And he's just like that. He's got that package that's so good. And I do not think he's going to let them pull up on the gas at all.
I would think so. Turnovers and third down defense. Those are the two things that I'm eager to see if they can improve on. Like I think they'll be able to really kind of muck it up for teams that want to try and run against them. Like I really think Ty Robinson and Nash and whether it's Butler or Linhart, like I think they're going to just really make life tough for teams that want to run against them. But can they get off the field on third down? Can they force turnovers? Those are the two things I'm very eager to see.
Yep. And the 4-man rush connects to the takeaways. I want to see a defense this year where I don't feel like this has happened enough with Nebraska football in recent time. And even last year, as good as they were on defense, is where there's those hits on the QB, ball comes out, you're either on it or someone's running the other way with it. Like I'd love to see a couple of those plays at least this year where it's like a forced fumble, guys running toward the end zone, and double or triple that with just forced fumble, you come up with it. I think they have the players that we've talked about all offseason on the D-line to do that. So now go do it.
Yeah. What was James Williams? They got 13 pitches. Is that what he said yesterday?
He said, I'm maybe the cutter. Kai Wallen's slider. Then he was going to say Sua. And he said, I don't know that much about baseball. He seemed to, though, by giving off you talk about a cutter. I think you know something.
Yeah.
But his phone went off. James Williams, by the way, he's going to have to, I told you this, he's going to have to be like Cody Green used to be, where he just, no matter what, even if he only played 12 snaps, he comes in and he assesses the defensive line play for us in the post-game room because he's that good. Like at talking.
Just really kind of puts his arms around everything and brings it all together. Yeah. Yep.
Yeah. I thought Van Poppel did some good things. Like
yeah,
I'd be all for that. Well, anything else?
No, we'll continue to see what are things and not things as fall camp rolls on, but football is close. We're almost 2 weeks out.
Yeah. Sorry. I went on that Werther's rant. But it was building up and I just had to say it. Sometimes you have to speak.
You're just going on your morning walk, just stewing about your
Werther's. Got something to tell Bruntz on this thing.
Yeah.
When's he going to send me the podcast feed? Because I got to get this off my chest.
Yeah, I like it.
So I did. All right. Well, like Bruntz said, we got a lot of stuff happening on Husker 24/7. We'll continue with all the coverage as we head toward game day. Join us and read all the stuff. And thanks for listening.